Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the next to the last session. Today being the final day, right? Fourth year of this conference. Had some very, very interesting discussions earlier this morning, and I understand Thursday was a great day too. As Jimmy said, I've been looking at the idea of defending the faithful for a couple of years now. I must say that this is not a one-shot day process. It becomes a way of life. The more you know, the more you learn, the more you know how much you don't know. It's like any other study that you engage in. I'm going to start off with the major premise. Anything that we do in terms of safety and or security, the team members are charged with this. So as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. The reason I say that is some communities have security systems. Some people join those so that they can exercise their right to stand around and do this. That's not what this is about. This is about serving the Lord, serving our brothers and sisters in a way that we can offer protection and safety. This next slide, I didn't realize how topical this was going to be. But this idea, critical thinking, is an imperative as we study Scripture, as we go through our lives. And I'm going to touch bases on this idea as we go through this presentation today. What is critical thinking and how can one become a critical thinker? For starters, and most fundamentally, critical thinking is tough. It is eminently laborious, demanding thousands and thousands of hours over the span of years and decades, reading, writing, introspection, reflection, and rigorously analyzing arguments, both those that support one's own point of view and, crucially, those that are designed to counter it. Perhaps as important as any other requirement, critical thinking demands courage, the guts to risk defying the conventional wisdom, the dogma. And if you think about some of the talks that we've had today, where we're analyzing the scriptures, Jason's lessons on proving the canon of the scriptures, that is an example of critical thinking. You look at the evidence objectively. You weigh that evidence with other evidence around you. One of the points that I've heard about, especially in safety and security, is it's like connecting the dots, but it's called pattern recognition. And this goes to behavior issues, which we'll talk about later. Pattern recognition is eminently important in studying the scriptures. You have an idea over here that's reinforced over here, and it's reinforced over there, and you put it all together, and there's your evidence. So we'll be coming back to this idea of critical thinking. We were talking just before we began here a moment ago. The idea of setting up a team and having a plan started about 2.5, 3 years ago. And it wasn't a real significant incident that occurred. I think it was a Sunday evening. A young man came through this door about a quarter of the way into Jimmy's lesson. And he sat down right over here about where David is. He had with him a backpack. So he sat there for about 10 minutes or so. He got up and walked out, left the backpack. So my little, what's going on here, bell starts to ring. And I start to count backwards from 30 and say, okay, I'm going to get up 30 seconds and go check that backpack. 10 seconds later, he comes walking back in. So I'm saying, all right, he must have gone out, sneeze or cough or blow his nose or something. About 10 minutes later, he does it again. And I'm saying, well, there's a problem with this young man. I wonder what he's doing. And he came right back in again. So the service concluded, and I started out the aisle, and Chris went by me. He went out to find out what the problem was with the young man. Apparently, he had been here sometime in the past. He was remembering some incidents on his own, and he was kind of emotionally upset at the time. And that's all it was. So I asked Chris, what happened when he came back in, and we discussed, the young man and all that. And so the following week, we had a men's business meeting. And I brought up the question of, did anybody else notice what happened last Sunday night? Well, yeah, the guy went outside, and I said, what about the backpack? And the light went on. Hey, we should have done something. I hate to use the term suspicious package. The packages don't do anything. They just sit there. But that was a suspicious incident. Correspondingly, Jimmy asked me if I would sit in on a seminar that was being presented by one of the local law enforcement agencies. And it was a couple of weeks down the road, but he had already had commitments. So, well, that sounds interesting. Let's see what that's all about. So that started my journey into safety and security, listening to seminars presented by various federal and state and local organizations. And I'll give you some names of those organizations here in a moment. But the further I went into that, the more I could see that, with the culture and the attitude that we're seeing nowadays, we ought to take a close look at this idea. We have several members of our congregation who are older than I am, and I'm older than dirt. So we need to have people that are trained in doing a quick assessment of an emergency situation. If someone faints, passes out, or falls down, we need to have people trained that can make that quick assessment and find out what's going on, apply those principles, and call 911 if and when necessary. So from that point, we kept developing more and more and more. Just as a quick guess, with the seminars that went on for a couple of years now, other training that I've been involved in, probably got 200 or 300 hours background information, and each time learning more and more and more and how to apply it to our situation here. And like I said before, it's a work in progress, just like our spiritual life. We need to continue to develop, to continue to learn, to continue to apply those principles that we learn. Lastly, we deal with the situation we're in now, the COVID-19. That's just another reminder of how we need to be adaptable. We need to be able to deal with situations as they change. And we've had to do that here. You see the seats that are arranged. You sit here and not there. It's maintaining the social distancing. We've revised our communion operation to accommodate for keeping people protected from that virus. These three items are the way I kind of grouped the information today. It covers basically the who, what, where, when, and why do we have a safety and a security program? First part of this is the purpose. Actually, it's a twofold purpose. One is the purpose is for me to communicate to you how we put this program together, why we think it's necessary, how we continue to add to it. And the purpose is to use that information, take it to your congregations, and apply it there. The process. How do we do all this information gathering? How do we put it together in its coherency? How do we make a plan? What factors and what things go into that plan? And thirdly, you have a copy in your hand of the plan. It's an overview of the plan that we are using now. The purpose overview. Maintain a welcoming environment, and that goes back to the first scripture that we read. That's always paramount. That's, as they say on Star Trek, that's the prime directive. Number 2, commit to serve and protect. Understand the need. Our duty to inform. One of the things that struck me as I attended these various seminars, and they were presented by Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security, FBI, local sheriffs. There's an organization that puts these all together. It's called the Orange County Intelligence Assessment Council. And the contact that Jimmy has through his chaplain's duties is Kathleen Kuhlman, and she's the one that sets these seminars up, and she communicates to all the various churches in the area. The guy from the FBI made a summary that stuck with me, and nearly every time the same thing was brought up. He listed the resources that they had to help organizations of faith, faith-based organizations is what they call it. And he says, we have information that's available for schools, for businesses, for government agencies, government buildings, and now we're including faith-based organizations. And we feel it's our duty to share that with people for their own protection. We have the duty too. Establish a mindset. And this is another one of those key factors when you deal with the elements of security and safety. You need to develop this idea that Jimmy said a couple of weeks ago, pay attention. And we're going to cover that in the next slide. Define, develop, and implement. Now this is a bunch of long words. Premeditated, preemptive mitigation. Now think about that. Premeditated, preemptive mitigation protocols. We're going to come back to that, the last slide I have in the presentation. An overview. The subject is why a plan. The results or outcome is provide a safe worship environment. What skills are needed to do that? The team must function as one. Who benefits? All the members and guests. What skills are needed? The leadership skills of that team and the support of the elders and ministers. Identify the areas covered. What are you looking at? Proactive risk mitigation. The tools to manage emergency situation is what we need to do that. The subject is clearly defined responsibilities. What does that do? It gives us uniform procedures. What's needed to get that done? The organization and communication with team members, with outside resources, so that we can continue to communicate, give updates. Let me give you an example of clearly defined responsibilities, and we'll touch on that in one of the other elements in the first aid and earthquake thing. In attending the community emergency response team training, got all that out, for the city of Corona, one of the things they emphasized is the training that they're giving us is in case of a major disaster, where you may not get any help for a period of 3 to 4 days. So it's incumbent on each of us to learn how to take care of ourselves and our family, assuming that no EMTs or no firemen or no police are going to be available. The thing that struck me as different than what we've normally heard is, let's say Dave back here falls over in his seat. Who's first there, Chris or Jason? If it's Chris, he becomes the officer in charge. First person on the scene, begins the process. Other team members go there, and Chris will make decisions on who does what after he does an assessment of the person's injury. And we'll cover that in the first aid section. First person on the scene becomes the officer in charge. That's why we do cross-training. Another process in developing the plan, gather information. We've talked about attending seminars, web-based study materials, examples from other churches, interactions with work groups from those churches. You evaluate your vulnerabilities. What are your areas of prime risk? What's needed then to fill those gaps? What training is needed to mitigate risk factors? In closing those gaps, you must consider the layout of your facility, modify your current practices if necessary, and again, look at your demographics. Demographics meaning like we did when we looked at first aid with the elderlies. What do we need to do to make sure we take care of those folks that are with us? What steps do we need to take? Other resources. The city, county organizations such as fire departments, police departments. There's various federal agencies, and like I said before, all of these agencies have contributed to these seminars. And each time there's one presented, they may cover a slightly different area. Department of Homeland Security, a Federal Emergency Management Agency, and a new one is called CISA. That is the computerized, what's the word I'm looking for? It's the electrical grids and all that type of equipment that needs to be maintained so that we can continue infrastructure, intelligence agency, security agency, interactions with other churches, and we mentioned that before, interchange and samples of actual plans that have been developed. Doing that, we can see the use of best practices. Solicit input from experienced in-house members. And that's a very important resource. We have one gentleman that's part of our team who is an administrator in a fire agency in the area, very knowledgeable about that kind of equipment, what's needed in training. We also have two other team members that have experience in the medical field, and so their input is valuable as well. There's one other member who's not here. This dear lady has worked in a area that she is very familiar with safety and security, OSHA requirements, and all that type of information. And we value her inputs as well. One of the other key factors is to adapt your plan to your specific location and your specific demographics. Where are you located? What is the situation with where your building is? Looking at all those factors. Vulnerabilities. And here are some of the assessment criteria. After you make your list of what you figure are soft targets, is the term they use, prioritize those. Ask the question, why is it necessary that we do this? Safety, frequency, and severity. And I've mentioned this before as we've presented this to our members. Jimmy mentioned that I spent a few years with Hunt Wesson, and several of those years was a manager of a distribution center and warehousing operation. Safety was a big concern because we got material handling equipment, a lot of employees, material stacked up to the ceiling. Frequency and severity are two different measurements. Frequency is how often does this event occur? And if it does occur, what is the severity? Is it deadly? Is it minor injury? Is it bee sting? Is it dust in the eye? My boss one time came down and started to really give me the bad look about your safety record is horrible. And I said, is that true? He says, yes, you've had 7 injuries in the last 2 months. So I commenced to name them. About 5 of those 7 were dust in your eyes because the wind was blowing. We can't control that. One guy did have a bee sting, and one guy did fall down and scraped up his arm. And I told him, I said, we do have safety meetings every month. We have records of them. It's important for our guys to know what to do, where to go, and what to watch for. He said, okay, that sounds good. Harden the target areas is the next one. I mentioned just a moment ago, what are your soft areas? Where are you weak? Do you have consistent and regular closing of your doors policies? We'll talk about that too in another section of this. Next one, can it be done? Is it doable? Is it reasonable? Is it cost prohibitive? Or is it really something we need to invest in because it is a high priority? What's the downside if it's not done? And here we go back again to that critical thinking. Look at the evidence, look at what the plan is, look at what the outcome might be, the downside of that. And finally, define your desired outcomes. What do you want this plan to cover? What do you want to be the end result? How do you do that? Review current, past, and desired practices. The objective is to identify those gaps. List those topics, and then fill those gaps. Now, I might add that many of these agencies will supply you with a list of those types of things that they're looking for, and ask the questions, and you simply fill them out. What have you done? What are you doing? What do you need to do? And they'll help tremendously. Work on one aspect of a time. Keep your focus on that current topic. Evaluate all inputs. Like I say, we have several folks in-house that have valuable inputs in how we can and should do these things. The more you do that, you're going to get better buy-in. Back to keep focus on current topics. Have you heard of mission creep? You know what mission creep is? You want to build a house and you design it. You get 2/3 of the way through and then you say, my wife says, oh, it would be nice to extend the master bedroom out another 10 feet. That's mission creep. So stay with your defined purpose. Work on that one and complete it, and if necessary, add it on, but keep that at a minimum. Pick team members, you solicit their commitment, provide training for necessary skill sets, and trained to a level of competency. Back to provide training. When we first began to think about a first aid program, the question came around, well, how many people actually have had training and have a Red Cross certificate or card that says they've had this training? Turns out not very many. So with the cooperation of the elders, we had a first aid training class, and there was about 20 some odd people that came for that class. But that's one of the skill sets that we figured we needed in order to be able to do that quick assessment. Pick team members, solicit, I already covered that. As I mentioned before, here are some of the local agencies, the local fire and law enforcement. That includes city and county. The county sheriff's department is really active in these endeavors, in the seminars and the training. The federal partners, as I said before, Homeland Security, FEMA, FBI, and CISA. FEMA, for instance, has a website. They all do. But if you're interested, type in FEMA Independent Studies. And it'll take you to a page, and you can select from a list of a dozen or so areas. And if you go to church security, they have pages and pages of these plans, how you develop them, what you need to do, how you assess your vulnerabilities and all that, the communications. Very typically government-oriented, if you will. I mean that in a good way. Other areas to go to is faith-based organizations, your insurance carrier. Larry communicates with our insurance carrier. In fact, one of the slides I have here came from one of their brochures that they send out. Local fusion centers. Again, that's going back to the Orange County Intelligence Agency. 2 weeks ago, Thursday, there was a joint regional intelligence center conference on live streaming, and it included Orange County, Riverside County, and San Bernardino County. And they did the same thing. They went over and reviewed these steps, but now it reaches a wider audience. To my knowledge, Riverside County didn't have much of an organization that provided that information. And I'm glad to see them expanding that. Another faith-based organization, one of the seminars that I attended was presented by a group out of Colorado. It's called CV Ministries, Core Values Ministries. The gentleman that presented this seminar had experienced an active shooter event in their congregation. And they went head over heels into church security, many of them being former law enforcement. I do receive emails from them on a fairly monthly basis, not so much since the virus thing has come in. But they give us ideas of other seminars that they're holding, where they're located. One of the fellows in particular does research throughout the country, and he sends out a list of incidents that occurred in faith-based organizations over the month. And there can be anywhere from 15 to 20 to 30 incidents a month that are reported all over the country. Some of them minor, some of them major, but they're there. Here's what our emergency response plan focuses on. We've talked about first aid, fire suppression, earthquakes, evacuation protocols, which is tied in with those fire and earthquake, safety and security issues. We're going to talk a lot about situational awareness, de-escalation techniques, see something, say something, and finally, active shooter incidents. What are the agency guidelines? The run, hide, fight. the last resort being fight. Some discussion on use of force. We need to think about that. And then we have post-incident protocols. After the event happens, what do you do? And again, preemptive mitigation is the goal. Back to slide number 2 again. Maintain welcoming attitude. I'm not going to give up hitting that. That's important. Situational awareness, and we had a video presentation on this element by one of the gentlemen that works for that CV Ministries. There are 5 levels of situational awareness: white, yellow, orange, red, and black. So in your house, you're sitting there watching The Voice. You're in that white stage. You're not watching as what's going on around you. You're watching who's singing next, who's going to turn. So you get out of your chair and you go to the car, you start it up and you back out of the garage. You're on the street where you live and you advance to the yellow stage. In other words, you're now watching what's in front of me. Here's my rear view mirror over here. Here's one on my left side. And let's look at this one. What's going on around me? Are those kids playing in the street again? So now I get on the 15 freeway and I jump up to orange level. So now you're going 70 miles an hour and the guy behind you is doing his makeup in your mirror. Then you get on the 91 freeway and you go to the red level. You're highly alert. You're watching 3, 4, 5 cars ahead of you. You're watching this guy over here on his cell phone. He's going like this. And you're watching the truck over there where the ladder's falling off in the 3rd lane. The black area is when you react. You see what's going on around you, you have a plan, and you react and you do it down. The OODA loop is another video thing that we observed. It's kind of the corollary to situational awareness. If I remember correctly, it's a group of common sense practices, if you will. But the guy who developed this was a pilot in World War II. And he was looking around at his fellow pilots and seeing what they did in terms of when the enemy attacked them and how some would react and how some would loop and how some would come around behind. And he says, there's got to be a commonality in this. So he developed this idea: observe, orient, decide, and act. And this is a thing that you practice daily, hourly. Whenever you're walking down the street, whenever you're going in a group area, if you come in this building, are you looking to see where the exits are? Do you know how many exits there are in the back? Is there another exit over here in the other room if these are blocked? So and it's not a paranoia, it's just, this is something I want to check so I'll know where I am. And you observe that. The next step is orienting yourself. Where am I in this environment? Am I able to go there, or do I go out here? Which is the quickest? And you're just unconsciously, subconsciously thinking about these things. 3rd and 4th is decide and act in that order. Make your decision and then do it. I have a rather crude little saying I read the other day. I mentioned to my wife, make a decision. The road is paved with dead squirrels who could not make a decision. The other thing is use of security devices such as video cameras and two-way radios for your team. We have looked into that, and we have a bid from a fellow that sometime we're going to go back to that. because I think it's very crucial that we have a way to see what's going on in the area. We'll talk a little bit later about where do you focus your attention. Lastly, continue to improve, revise, and adapt. How much time do I have? 25 minutes. I'm going. This is another toolbox item. And this came from that community emergency reaction team training. This is how they train their fire departments, their police departments. We went through several exercises with that group. We did a building, went out and put a fire out, and we drugged people out from upstairs, and we did triage. This guy's dead, this guy's disoriented, but this guy needs treatment, so you take them to different areas of the triage area. But this is how people look at people to do assessment, gather facts and document objective findings. And that goes back again to the critical thinking process. You don't write down what you think happened, you write down what you see happened. Perform damage assessment and communicate to chain of command. If you're the first one on the scene, then you go to the officer that is coordinating the whole effort. Consider probabilities of your actions and or non-actions. And as Jimmy has preached to us before, if this happens, then do that. Assess your own situation, being fully aware of your capabilities and your surroundings. And again, this goes back to training. And they were very emphatic in telling people, if you're going to be on this team, you've got to know what you can do and what you can't do. Don't rush into a burning building because you don't have oxygen and fire equipment. Don't be a hero. Wait till they get there, or be sure and call them, but wait till they get there. Now, if you can find a way to get in, you can rescue somebody without danger, go ahead. Establish your priorities. Do the most good for the most number of people. One of the real engaging videos that they showed in this training, the firemen responded to an overturned bus. Some of you may have seen that before. Lots of injuries. One fireman goes in the front, one goes in the back, and they're EMTs, they know what they're doing. Rather than run around trying to find the one that was injured the most, they treat the one they come up on. Here's number one, you do a quick assessment. What do they need? You stop the bleeding, you tag them, and the triage unit then comes and takes over. But you do the most good for the most number of people. Treat them quickly, move to the next. Develop a plan of action, implement that plan, and then periodically evaluate the progress and adjust as necessary. So that's what the CERT people call a size up. First aid or CPR. Use the first aid training guidelines to make a quick assessment of the injury. And that's what we talked about a little bit before. If Chris is on the scene, David's laying down, what happened? They check the breathing, the pulse, the consciousness, and bleeding. Apply the proper protocols, clear obstructions if necessary, check pulse and breathing again, apply CPR till breathing resumes, apply sufficient pressure to wound to inhibit or stop the bleeding. And these are all basic things. Assign team member to dial 911 if condition is deemed serious. When calling 911, give specific directions, address, and location of the injured party. Provide as much information as is known regarding condition of the wounded or injured person. Team members assist with keeping area clear, keeping the pathway clear, keeping the entrances clear, and even meeting emergency medical technicians at the front gate or at the front door and escort them to where the party needs help. In case of fire, I don't know if you can read all this or not. This is kind of small printing. Again, the first team member becomes the officer in charge. Perform an assessment of the source and magnitude of the fire. That's the size up that we talked about. If just a small paper fire, use available fire extinguisher. Use the pass routine. Pass means pull the pin on the handle, aim the funnel at the base of the fire, squeeze the handle, and sweep the base of the fire till the flames are out. There's another part of that, and if you've watched any of the Chicago fire stories or any of those other stories, you'll see after they put the fire out, the captain will say, "You go do an overhaul." The overhaul is when you go back to the fire and you hit it again, and you make sure that there's no more embers, no more fire into that, under the ashes. If the fire is confined to a room and don't touch the door knob. Feel the lower portion of the door with the back of your hand. If it's hot, don't enter that door. Get out of town right then and there. Check and make sure that your other team members are with you. And then you leave. Account for all team members, close the door, and leave immediately. As soon as it's safe to do so, call 911 and report the incident details. Begin evacuation procedure. Instruct the congregation to leave area using exits away from the fire. Assist anyone with physical difficulties, and if you have to, leave their belongings. Make sure they can exit safely. Communicate instructions to all members to gather at the northeast section of the front parking lot, which is out that main door and just to the left there. You'll notice there's signs posted on the back of the building and in the other areas. The reason for this area is so that everyone could gather up there. One of the team members is going to go around and say, "Do you have everyone with you? Do you have children somewhere else? Are they in the classrooms upstairs? Is everyone accounted for?" If not, then it's up to the officer in charge. If it's safe to dispatch someone to go look for them if they know where they are. If it's not safe, you're going to have to wait till the fire department comes. They don't want to have to go find you if you're lost or in a conflagration and can't get out. Earthquakes is very similar to fires. Take cover by ducking under the pews or in the corners of the building. They call it a golden triangle. If possible, stay away from the windows to avoid breaking glass. If difficult to get under the seating, cover head with a book or other protective surface. As soon as safe, follow the same evacuation plan as the fire. Move quickly to closest exit and gather at the safe spot in the front parking lot. Team members assist the elderly or injured as necessary. Facilitate evacuation by keeping doorways clear and people moving safely. Again, when it's safe to do so, conduct search in the remaining part of the facility. Okay, we're back to situational awareness again. We're back to prime directive again. Be focused and engaged in worship activities. Be aware of activities around you that are not part of the worship and may become disruptive or distracting to others. Pay attention to extreme, highly vocal, combative conversations or other signs of aggressive behavior. Usually out of character or seasonal garments such as heavy coats, carrying and or walking away from packages or backpacks. We talked about that before. Use those awareness tactics from the time you park your car in the parking lot, as you enter the building, and as you enter the main auditorium or classroom and find your seat. As we mentioned before, video camera surveillance is important. We're looking at the parking areas for identifying these unusual outlier behaviors. If we wait until they get into the foyer, it may be too late. You see somebody running, they're carrying a weapon, you can identify them and put a stop to it at the door. That's the safest, that's the mitigation that we talk about. Exercise good judgment. Go back again to the critical thinking. Only act on what you see. So many times we hear people, well, he might be doing this. Well, he might, and he might not. It's hard not to do that, but you've got to build your reaction on actual facts. That's another part of see something, say something, and we'll cover that in just a moment. Team members, keep a watchful eye on others engaging with an aggressive person. Go to their aid immediately and attempt to de-escalate the conversation. If your conversation becomes confrontational, then call for assistance. De-escalation. Maintain control of your own emotions at all times. Attempt to divert conversation to induce the person to communicate in a more calm tone. As an example, introduce yourself and ask if they have been here to worship previously. Avoid being embroiled in their problem. Maintain your objectivity. Do not use condescending terms such as, well, you don't understand, or calm down. Ask person to help you clarify their position. Restate it to them. The goal is to put them at ease by showing empathy, and it may gain a sense of trust if you're doing that. I'd like to relate just an insignificant incident that happened, March, April, before the COVID thing happened. Sunday night, Alfredo came over to me and says, we have a problem in the Spanish group over here. I said, okay, we'll be right there. And I tapped Chris and away we went. So Chris went inside the hallway there to go in, and I took the outside path to the door where they might be coming out. And sure enough, here comes this guy followed by Alfredo and David. He's a young man, I guess, in his mid-20s. And apparently, what we could gather, he had some problem with something that Polo was talking about in his lesson. We never did determine exactly what it was. But Chris begins to talk with him, and I'm off just a little bit to this person's right. And I'm saying to myself, okay, what's this guy's behavior? His voice is elevated. He's speaking very rapidly. He's in a fight or flight stance. His hands are like this. So this guy may be agitated. Don't draw conclusions. So Chris begins talking to him. And then he asks him, do you speak English? And the guy answered perfect English. So Chris says the same thing as we mentioned here. Have you been here before? Would you like to study about the Church of Christ? He says, I'm one of the elders here, and we'll be more than glad to study with you. So the guy relaxed, and his hands went down. And I walked up and I says, hi, I'm Gary. What's your name? He said, my name's Eduardo. And I says, Eduardo, are you from around here somewhere? And he says, yeah, just over wherever. So Chris approached him again about studying with him, and he took his card. And he finally calmed down, and finally he left. He never did say whether he'd come back or not, did he? So anyway, here's my point. You run into a conflict, a guy interrupting the services. It's unusual. It's not baseline behavior. So Alfredo and David are trying to get this fellow to sit down and kind of be quiet and let Polo finish. Didn't work very well. So he comes and asks another team member, can we have some help? And it worked. It was not a big event, but it's an example of how to approach something that could become an event. Now, if this guy had remained in that combative situation, what would we have done? We would probably have escorted him into a private room and talked with him a little more firmer. We don't approve of this kind of behavior. You're welcome to come and worship with us. We'll talk with you, but we don't want you interrupting the services. At that point, I would have called the police. I would have said something. Let me explain why. These fusion centers keep records of all those calls that come into the police of incidents that happen like that. They may not be major, but they may be worthy of consideration because of the thing I call pattern recognition. They may have records of other groups that have experienced the same guy, comes in and disrupts, medium 20s, about 5'9". So they start putting it together, and this guy has been doing this for a period of time. So then Kathleen will send out a bulletin to the local churches and say, be on the lookout for this fellow. He may come into your facility. This is what he's been doing. Watch out for him. So we have a credible threat right there. I'm getting 6 minutes. Entry-exit control. We've talked about this. Keep your doors locked if you're not using them. Position your ushers and your greeters at those main entrance locations. Did you see the signs as you come in at the front of the building? It says use main entrance. That's why we have that. Consider installing closed-circuit TV cameras. Say something, see something. See something, say something. We've talked about this before. Be alert to activities that are out of baseline, that are unusual. Watch for unusual dress. I'm going to speed up a little bit here. And we've talked about the last two here. If you experience an incident where you feel threatened or fearful, bring it to the attention of the team members or call police. Here's what's important. If you're going to call in and report, who, what, where, when, and why are you reporting it? Be specific and be objective so that the responding officers will know what to do. This is the presentation from the insurance carrier, very similar to what we've talked about before with prepare the organization, have a written program, etc. So I'm going to jump through that. Active shooters. This is one of the more controversial plans that are in effect in a lot of churches. Some feel that we don't really need that. Some feel that we do. There have been numerous instances in the last 3 or 4 years. And I'm going to do a little quick drama for you as we go through this. White Settlement, Texas, December of last year. 10 minutes till 11. Congregation of about 240 people. They have live stream cameras going. They're now serving the communion. Fellows sitting right up here. 2 gentlemen serving the communion about the 4th row in and about the 6th row in. The 3rd gentleman is back about the 8th row. This fellow stands up. He's wearing a fake wig, a fake beard, and a long overcoat. Pulls out a firearm. He runs over and he talks to the guy right there, says something, backs up and shoots him. This guy is a CCW holder. He's reaching for his weapon so that he can take care of this threat. He doesn't get it out in time. The guy shoots the second person. This guy's name is Anton Wallace. First fellow's name is Richard White. Third guy, he's head of their security. He's a former law enforcement officer. He has his gun at ready. He has now a clear shot because these other two gentlemen are down. He draws and fires one shot. The threat has been neutralized. Average response time for a SWAT team of police officers, 6, 7, 8 minutes. That transpired in 6 seconds. If you watch the video, you'll see, I think I counted 6 other people in the congregation were armed, stood up. They had no clear shot either, but Jack Wilson did. Now, the frequency of those, very low. The risk, probably like getting struck with lightning. The severity, number 10 on a scale of 10. I'm done being melodramatic, so let's move on. Law enforcement says run, hide, and fight. Upon hearing gunshots, you determine the origin, run immediately to a safe room away from the sound. Lock and barricade the doors. Turn off your cell phone so that you don't give yourself away. Although some precincts now have texting on 911, you can send them a text, keep it quiet. And then when it's safe, call them. If no safe room available, use same procedures of earthquake, drill, shelter in place, duck under and keep quiet. Active shooter, get rid of the threat. Distract, disarm, do whatever you have to do. If you have a team, use a swarm technique where members tackle the shooter, grab his hands, grab his feet, grab his head, put him to the ground, defend. Other tools could be pepper spray, a taser device, firearms. Some will require training and licensing. A lot of organizations hire former law enforcement as their security teams. And be sure and notify your insurance carrier. Protocols after it happens. Follow the orders of the law enforcement to the letter. Answer their questions. And I'm going to jump. Our marching orders. As members of the team, as Christians, commit to what you're doing. Commit to the Lord. Commit your soul to the Lord. Commit to serve. If you're a team member, commit to do what it takes to make people safe. Do your training, as we've done here in the last 3 days. Listen up. Take those things that you've heard and apply them. Gear up, which means putting the ground those things that you've learned. Doesn't do any good if you don't use it. And that's where deploy comes in. Get on the ground, get with the people you're going to convince to believe in God Almighty. Last in toolbox. But also in this very thing, bringing in all diligence, filling out your faith with virtue knowledge, with knowledge self-control, with self-control patience, with patience godliness, and with godliness brotherly kindness, and brotherly kindness with love. Last slide. What does premeditated mean? An action thought out or planned beforehand. Preemptive action intended to preempt or forestall something. Mitigation, an action to reduce the severity, seriousness, or painfulness of something. Where is the source of all those virtues that we read in the previous slide? Where is the source of goodness? What behavior should we emulate? Who premeditatedly established a preemptive action to mitigate our soul?